First of all, David, thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
being here. Thank you for being the guest. And one thing I find very interesting that I wanted to talk about was being a filmmaker, but also being an educator. And I would like you to talk about your process of becoming a filmmaker, what got you into films, but also that pathway of wanting to teach filmmaking and teach film as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I was interested in making movies ever since I was like, 12 or 13 years old. I had I made little animated movies and I was just really interested in it. I actually went to a summer camp and there was this kid who was like a few years older than me, and he was showing a movie that he made on Super 8 where he like it was he took the song Superstition by Stevie Wonder, and like the character comes down the stairs and the music is playing and all like the furniture and things in the room were all like dancing to the rhythm of the song. And I was just so amazed that this kid did this by himself. And so like I kind of went home and figured out how to do it, and I borrowed my dad's Super 8 camera and I kind of started doing animation and I learned a little bit about it. And so that was kind of what got me initially started on it. But then, I didn't really think of it as a career. It was just what I did, it was what entertained me. And then I saw Star Wars later, a few years later, and like that just kind of blew me away. I do remember, like, for example, there was a documentary about making Star Wars. And I remember like there was a scene where they were talking about how they acquired the audio for it. And like this guy was in the desert with this high tension wire that holds up telephone poles. And he
Mhm.
had a little mallet and he was hitting the the cable with this mallet, and it went pew, it made this noise. And that was the exact noise that they used for the blasters in Star Wars. And I was like, oh my God, it started to put together like how manufactured the whole process was. And it just seemed so cool to me. And that's kind of what got me started in wanting to make movies, was just, being exposed to it. My mother and father were big movies fans, so they would take me to the movies a lot. I grew up in New York, so I went to the theater a lot. So storytelling and movies and theater and, just performance, all that stuff was just something that I was always exposed to as a kid. And so it was just an opportunity to like, try things in that world. Yeah.
I find it so interesting how Star Wars is always the big one because, like, for you, I'm sure it was the original Star Wars, right?
Yes. I was
And
like 16 when it came out. Yeah. Or no,
and
younger. I was 15. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and I find it how everyone, the majority of people, bring up Star Wars because I remember when I was a child, it was also Star Wars for me, but it was the prequels. It was episodes 2 and 3. And by the time I saw them, it was years after they released. I was born in 2005, so that was episode 3. And it wasn't until, can I can even remember memories, so 2010, 2011, 6, 7 years old. I remember seeing Revenge of the Sith, and I was like, this is fucking awesome. That I love this. So I find it very interesting how Star Wars is kind of the main cascading
Yeah, we
factor.
had never I had never seen anything like it. Like I
Yeah.
saw movies that I enjoyed and I liked and stuff, but that was the one that like we had never seen anything like it. It was so great.
Yeah, and once you went to undergrad, got your undergrad degree, and then for a while there was a break, right? There's a big break for people in between undergrad school and grad school. When did you choose to go to grad school, and did going to grad school influence the way or influence your choice to start teaching filmmaking?
Yeah, so let's see. So I went to undergrad at Oneonta State, which is a state university college in New York. And they actually didn't have a film major in that program. They only had a film minor. And then but they had a lot of film classes and they were all in the theater area. And I was never really terribly interested in working in theater, but like, so I have a theater degree, because all the film classes were largely in the theater program. So I made a bunch of films there, and I really enjoyed it. But when I graduated, my first couple of years out of undergraduate, I actually just kind of moved from New York to Boulder on a whim with a friend of mine who I went to school with. We were good friends, and I got a job at the video station in Boulder, which was like this amazing video store at the time, you know. And so, I got to watch movies like, we were watching movies all the time and talking about movies all the time. So that was pretty cool, but I didn't really want to be a clerk for my career. So then I moved back to New York, and I started a video business where I was doing like all kinds of like videos for corporations, and I even did weddings and I did commercials, whatever job I could get to use my skills to make money. And I did that for about 4 years or 5 years or so. And I kind of got really, and I wanted to make movies that meant something to me. And I wasn't really enjoying the type of projects that I was doing. I was making a good living, I was making good money, but I just was not feeling satisfied with the type of work that I was doing. So, my mother was a jeweler, right? And she taught jewelry making, like she's an enamelist, and so she was like teaching people crafts, right? And my father was a mathematician who taught in college, right? And so I saw his lifestyle and I saw what my mother was doing, and I'm kind of a good combination of those two people because, you know, she was teaching people how to do art, and my father was in academic and using his knowledge to, he was also able to like experience. Let me turn that off. He was also able to experience what he was doing in mathematics in the university level. So it was so then when decided to go back to graduate school, it was a conscious decision. I was thinking, how am I ever, I had no connections to the industry. I didn't really want to live in LA. I didn't know if moving to LA was going to do anything for me. So I kind of chose the idea of like, why don't I try to make films at whatever level I can, as long as they're my projects. And I saw teaching film as both satisfying to teach people how to make movies, give them opportunities to try different things, and at the same point, use the freedom that comes with being a professor. Because part of our job, the expectation is that we produce work, write books, do something that is publishable, right? Or in my case, viewable. And so it was a conscious decision to, get an MFA so that I could teach at the college level. And so I saw it as a way to both, have a stable career, do something that I love, and then also get to make movies.
That's I find graduate school fascinating. I think it's one of the pathways I think people can find to really hone in on skills, because to me, a undergraduate degree is a very basic overview of what you are interested in. And I view graduate school as honing in and really combining your focus, your emphasis. So I think that's
Absolutely.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, and so I kind of wanted to get into the topics that we had discussed earlier, because
Yeah.
I love the topics that you brought up. And so to start off, I wanted to, before on this Zoom call, like we mentioned in our email, you mentioned some of the movies that you grew up watching, Animal House, The Breakfast Club. These films are cult classics, people could say, and they have their fan bases, but they are considered by most to be politically incorrect by today's standards. Why do you think that this shift has happened, and the audience is accepting them and or rejecting these films?
It's a tough question because it's a societal issue, right? Like, at the time, we didn't know that it was politically incorrect. I mean, we knew when people said some sort of racial epithet, which today you can't even use the N word, and it wasn't accepted then. But what it did is it said, well, if you're going to use that word, that tells us who you are as a person, right? And so it was, now we're not allowed to use the word, which is probably a very good thing, right? But like at the same point, like we saw it happen all the time. And so what it did is it normalized it, right? So like it made it acceptable. And so like Animal House, like the way if you look at that film, it's really misogynistic, like there's a lot of, women who are, sexual objects, and we didn't know that that was wrong, right? And so if you are exposed to all that all the time, then you just think that is the way it is. Now, that didn't really impact how I treated other people, right? You know, but if you look at a show like Breakfast Club, which is still a movie that people love, like the guy, have you seen that movie?
I have seen that movie.
So the guy who plays the bad boy, Judd Nelson, right? All the girls that I went to school with said how hot he was, how cool he was, and
Yeah.
so the boys were trying to be like that guy. They dressed like him. But if you look at what he does and says, he's really mean to to these people. Like he's a real dick, And so, um, let me turn my phone off here. He's a real dick, So I'm kind of like surprised that why is this the person that the girls were trying, they thought was the attractive one, right? So as to like, another one was like a movie like The Bad News Bears, like that movie, again, it was funny because how wrong it was. It wasn't because we all bought into it, right? Like, so the story is like an alcoholic who is going to be teaching. He's going to be coaching a little league team, and so like he just is a drunkard, and like he's like lets the kids do whatever they want. He gives them alcohol. He drives, and the kids. There's no seat belts, right? There's like he's driving a convertible, and they're all like hanging out the side of the car, like there's no like it was. And it was funny, right? And the kids were just using this terrible language. And I still think it's funny. To this day, I still laugh at those movies, but I can see why it's wrong.
Yeah.
So if you ask me then why has it changed, I think that's just kind of the way the culture has gotten. I would just say, um, what is complicated about it is that where did it go wrong? Like what happened that made us aware of that? Like I've been to London a bunch of times, and if you look on public television, the BBC, they have like two or three or four stations. Like nudity is normal there. Like you can see nudity on public television. And in the United States, it's a much more prudish sort of country where you're
Mhm.
not allowed to show any kind of nudity, but it's okay to show somebody's head getting chopped off, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of the opposite there. So why is it okay for people to be murdered in the United States, but you can't show boobs or you can't show nudity, where
Yeah.
nudity is, like we all get naked when we get shot, like it's a common thing.
Yeah.
Sexual we are sexual beings, like it's common, but we're not allowed to have that in this country, and that's just sort of the culture of our country here. So I'm not really sure why it happened, and in some ways it's probably for the best because now we're seeing more equity, amongst like there's more women filmmakers, there's more actors of different colors, and so I do think it's a good thing, but I also am concerned about this notion that comedy has to be just this thing. It can't be this thing. And somebody who makes dark comedy, and I grew up with dark comedy, I have to kind of play a balancing line. I have to balance it like what I think is funny and when do I go over the line? And I
Yeah.
even like in my house with my family and my kids, the kind of humor that I do is I like to like push buttons and make people a little uncomfortable. And I think that's funny. And so that's the kind of thing that makes me laugh. I don't really laugh at a lot of comedies. I don't think Adam Sandler is funny. I
Yeah.
don't, like I don't like slapstick. The people the movies that they say are the funniest movies ever. I typically don't think those are funny. Blazing Saddles, by the way, is a movie that I don't really think is funny, but it's still like a cult classic, and that cannot be made today because it is also very racist, you know?
Yeah.
And
And
so, where did it change? I don't really know, but like, uh, sh I just am a little concerned with canceling anybody who you don't think is funny. Like, okay,
No.
I can kind of guess. I can kind of sense when like, even in our class, like if I showed that scene from Harry Met Sally, where the woman pretends to have an orgasm, and I saw some of the other people like, oh my God, like I saw them getting sort of like, she's not actually having sex, she's pretending like she's not doing it, right? And so I can see where they were uncomfortable with that. And I felt a little, uh-oh, maybe I crossed a line here. Maybe I should have had a trigger warning or something. But it didn't even occur to me that, it might be triggering because there's no nudity. There's no on-screen sex. It's just a woman acting. That's all it is, you know?
No. And I and all of these films that we just talked about, they're all comedic. They're all comedies in a sense. And I would argue that that is one of the hardest genres to do because comedy is so subjective,
Yes.
right? Like exactly what you were saying. You find you have a certain humor, and some people just don't have it. I have a certain humor, and I laugh at certain things, and then my friends and my family think I'm fucking stupid because I laugh at stuff. Like my favorite type. Like I have to agree. I don't really prefer like I think there's a very mass general comedy genre like that. There, I think there's a subgenre of comedies that are like made for mass audiences where they're very generally funny. And then there's like certain comedic shows or films where it's so niche and it's so weird. And I'm not a big fan of the mass general comedy sense. So when I look back at movies like Blazing Saddles, for example, I think that film is it's almost like a spoof
It
and
is.
and
Yeah.
and I find and I actually am a very big fan of spoofs. I think spoofs are ridiculous. You know,
They're
it's
culturally important too. Yes.
I yeah, because it shows of what things are, and I think I have a very soft spot for spoof movies because it I have a belief like it's so stupid, it's funny. And there's
It's also
also like
making fun of a genre too. Like that's making fun of Westerns. And then Mel Brooks did Spaceballs and he's making fun of science fiction movies and he did Young Frankenstein. He's making, so that's his whole thing, right? And so I agree
yeah,
with you. I think that satire is an important thing, is what I think. Yeah.
yeah, it's yeah. Like for example, like one of my favorite comedies is Police Squad or Naked Gun with Leslie Nielsen. Like I that's like those are like my favorite, and so
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of those. I think they're so ridiculous, but also comedy is such a hard thing, right? And one of the things I think of, and I think of when you look back at stuff like that, because those shows, those films that we brought up, they're from an older generation. And so now it's this whole different spectrum of what's funny, what do we like, what do we enjoy to watch, and it's completely changed now. And so I think about how I view things or how you view things. Do you think that we've lost anything valuable in the process of moving away from these like niche, edgy, problematic films or shows? Or is it necessary to move on from them and kind of forget about them?
Sadly, like, my experience with trying to get movies funded, comedies are like studios don't trust comedies because, like you just said, because they are purely a business. They're not looking at the artistic elements of it, the people that are at the top of the food chain of the Hollywood system. And comedies are a big risk because, not everybody has the same sense of humor. So I think it's a shame, because of that, that they don't really want to take that challenge and try to push comedies forward unless it's got a famous person like Adam Sandler is a good bet because that guy makes money for them, right? But like, somebody once explained it to me because I make dark comedy and he saw it this way. Like he said, David, you made a dark comedy. And if you think of it as like a strike zone, right? Like this is the strike zone for comedy, right? I made a dark comedy. This is the strike zone for dark comedy. Like people are
Mm,
gonna, so like it's a much narrower thing, and so it's a harder thing for them to market. It's a harder thing for them to make money on. But it's a shame though because I think the Coen brothers, those are the guys that make me laugh, right? That to me is the
yeah,
funniest kind of comedies, and a lot of people don't find humor in them at all because they're so dark. And you know, we in Fargo, for example, like we see this guy like chopping a guy up in a wood chipper, like,
yeah,
and he's looking like, what, like he like, and it's so absurd and horrible. Like that to me is funny. Of course, I don't want anybody in real life to be hurt or chopped up in a wood chipper, but it's cinema, it's fiction, and it's so absurd that I find that kind of stuff is funny. Um, but I don't know, did that answer your question? I can't.
yeah. It's just, I think about, you know, is there stuff of value in those older movies that we see as edgy or problematic? In my opinion, I think there is because whether in my opinion, whether we like it or not, these harmful views or stereotypes, I think we have to learn. I think there's just something about how the way that we look at people, view people, judge people, is something that we always do. And I think those films, Blazing Saddles, The Breakfast Club, they're so harsh in nature that I think it shows a unrelenting view of how sometimes the world kind of is.
Yeah. And let's take it another angle at it. Like, let's take a look at like even more recent films, like Big. That's still an old movie by today's standards, but Big is about a little boy who is in the body of a man, and he's being courted. Like, there's a woman who's an adult who's trying to have sex with him, but he's a child, but she doesn't know it. Is that pedophilia? And so that's one of those movies that could be canceled. But then what happened was this movie Poor Things came out. I don't know if you saw that.
I
But
did see that.
yeah, and so in my mind, that's kind of the same thing because she's a child. She has a child's brain in a woman's body, and people are having sex with her. Is that not pedophilia? Is like they're taking advantage of this girl because she's a child and she doesn't know any better. I can't believe that did not get canceled because
Yeah.
I mean I thought the movie was entertaining, but the whole movie I'm like, wait a minute, that's okay, but these other ones are not, so it's pretty like hit or miss, and it depends on who the person is. And sometimes there's like corporate warfare, like people go, say these terrible things about these movies. But I look at those movies, like there's different ways to look at the old ones as far as like historically, like sure, you can look at it and say, well, this is a reflection of society back then. Uh, but if you're still laughing at it, does the comedy still succeed? So it's more than just history. It's also somebody's vision, somebody's art, and somebody's, writing. And if you look at the amount of money some of these movies made, that is how they judge whether the movie is successful or not. Now, if one of your peers say, I hate that movie because it's disgusting, but Hollywood will be like, yeah, well, we made $1 billion off of it, so I don't really care what you think about it, like
Yeah.
so they're not too concerned with that kind of thing. And for people that are in film school, I'm a big proponent of you need to trust your voice because if you're going to sit down to write something and you're listening to what the culture is telling you what you're supposed to do and what box you're supposed to live in, then you can't just write the thing that is coming out of your soul that you think is entertaining because you're too worried about, oh yeah, my friend would tell me that this is, so the films that I've written, some of the stuff it was much worse than how it actually ended up. But I needed to write that originally, right? And so there is a point where you have to be like, okay, I crossed the line here, and so you have to know where the line is. And in dark comedy, there is this line. And as soon as you cross it, it's no longer funny, right? And so that you have to be kind of aware when you talk about like how comedy is hard, is because you have to decide what is the tone of your movie. Like Naked Gun and Airplane and things like that, like they are, a series of crazy jokes, right? It's joke after joke after joke after joke, and they're very funny because they're absurdist. The kind of stories that I was talking about, like with the Coen brothers, they're character driven. And so like what I find funny is how do people react to extreme situations? That to me is where the comedy is, not in like the joke that they tell, because all my characters and the characters of the movies that I like, they don't see it themselves as comics or that they're funny. They find themselves in a situation that is so bizarre, and we as the viewer see how they respond to it. That to me is the comedy that I love.
And it's one of those things because it's almost like if your actress or your character thinks what they're doing is funny, then it's almost there's a certain value I think that is lost, right? And in some things, like in the spoofs or even like on comedy sketches, they're almost in on it and they can laugh at their own jokes. SNL is a great example of that.
Yes.
Um, but I think about the dark comedies that you have made, or some of the other dark comedies I've watched recently, and they're in crazy situations, but yet they're trying to just deal with it as it's their normal life. This is who I am. I'm stuck in this. I need to get the hell out of it. And there is tons of movies, and we've talked about this movie before, and I actually just rewatched it 2 nights ago. Burn After Reading is
Oh
such a
yeah.
oh my god, that is such a ridiculously funny movie, and
Agreed.
it's such a just cascade of shit, and I love it. I think it's
And none
great.
of those people are clowns, right? They're all behaving the way that they were written, you know?
Yeah,
And so that to me, that movie is terrific. Yes.
yeah, that
Yeah.
is just a
Now, the other way to think about that, if we take it out of the world of comedy, unless I always like when I make like when I my characters, there's in my every movie should have a villain, or not every movie, but movies typically have a villain. And the best villains, like I always talk about this with my family and my son, like who are the best villains? Who do you love the most? As far as, we talk about like Heath Ledger as the Joker, or, Darth Vader. Like those characters work because they don't think they're doing anything wrong, right? They are evil in the grand scheme of things, but the way they are directed is that they don't think they're doing anything wrong. They are behaving the way they behave. And so those are the most successful characters, the villainous characters, because of that. And so when we made Publish or Perish, my character starts out as a nice guy and he slowly becomes a villain. We had these discussions like everything that he does, he thinks he's doing for a good reason, and so he's trying to keep his job so he can keep his family together, and he's trying to protect himself by having his job. And so in the way the discussions that I had with him, my actor, is like none of it was to be absurd or crazy or evil. It was all because in his mind he thinks he has to do this in order to survive.
and I wonder, you talk about directing, directing villains to see that they're doing what they believe is right. And I find that interesting because you look at some characters, and I think some of the like for example, I think about like some of the diehard villains,
Oh
and
yeah,
I think to
great
me
villain, great
they're
villain.
great,
Yeah,
and I think those are the ones that come to my mind. But also I think about some of the Rocky villains. Rocky Four with the I think it's four with the Russian guy,
yeah,
and
yeah. Dolph
and
Lundgren. Yeah.
yeah, and I think about them, and I think those are some of the greatest villains too. Think about that 80s, 90s
Yeah,
era.
what was Mr. T? He was a great villain. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think I think about those villains, and I wonder like how do you craft a good villain? And I wonder how do you create a convincing villain? It's easy. I think it's easy to be bad. It's easy to be evil, but how do you project? How do you show that you're evil or for your character's right reason. Because you're right, I don't think your character should think that they're evil because then it's almost like a false narrative to me, you know?
Like look, I could, so directing wise, first of all, let me take an example of a silly villain, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
So if you take a look in Star Wars, the not Darth Vader, but like the Emperor, right? With the
Mm.
guy with this electricity coming out of his fingers, he's like, ha, 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 ha. He's laughing, and I keep like, what's so funny? Like, I don't understand. Like, he's enjoying causing this pain, but we don't really know why. And so, like, to me, it's so cartoony, the wah ha ha ha, that it takes me out of the film because he just, I don't buy it. But if you look at, there's a show, Godless, Jeff Daniels. It's a Western TV show, and he is a terrifying villain, right? Terrifying. And what he's doing though is for the benefit of his crew, right? And so he lives in a world where there is no law, right? The law is what I say is the law. And so he doesn't know any different and he's going to do whatever he has to do. He has seen so much death that taking somebody's life is meaningless to him. And so when you direct somebody to be evil, I think you should come from the position of why. Like they have to have a backstory that makes sense. Like, and you have to have the discussion with the actor. Okay, you're coming from this world. You're behaving this way because you have no other way to behave, right? That is who you are as a person. And I think that is probably the better way to approach it instead of the wah angle. Yeah.
And I think Star Wars is such a great point to bring up with that again, because like when I was old enough, when I started really getting into Star Wars and I went back and watched the original trilogy, I was terrified of Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader.
Darth
And so
Vader. Yeah.
yeah, and I find it interesting how like those are both villains, but I think they're different villains, you know? And
Yes.
I find it interesting how you find one more believable than the other. Because
Yeah.
when I was a little kid, I was terrified of both.
Well, you were a child. You were a child, and you just see this scary looking guy, and you
Yeah,
don't know enough as a child to understand backstory or reasons why they do it. They're just doing naughty things, right? And
yeah,
it looks like he's hurting people. Well, I don't want people to be hurt. Luke Skywalker is the hero. Let's not hurt him. And so that's terrifying for a child. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. But that also makes me that makes me wonder something, you know, because as we watch films or shows when we're younger, maybe as kids or teenagers, and then we grow up and some of us go into the profession of filmmaking. Are there any films from your youth, maybe as a child or teenager, young adult, that you now view differently as a
Totally.
experienced filmmaker?
Totally. So, for example, I got a lot of those actually. So, movies that have not held up over time. When I was in college, I was a big fan of David Cronenberg. I loved his movies, and there was one that I remember James Wood starred in a movie called Videodrome. Uh, and Deborah Harry from Blondie was in it, and I remember thinking, "Oh my God, this is mind blowing! It was so good." And I watched it again, and it's a total bore, like so boring, and nothing happens. And the things that finally do happen, they're like the special effects don't really hold up over time, and the storyline just doesn't. So stuff like that. Like I've become less of a horror aficionado. When I was younger, I liked horror films more. Now I'm very selective of the type of horror films that I like. I still like some, but I don't enjoy sadism. I don't enjoy people hurting people like Terrifier and like Hostel. Like those movies kind of gross me out.
They're tough.
I don't enjoy that. The movie, what movie, like a good horror movie that I do like that came out fairly recently is Barbarian. That movie was just, it blew me away. They did a lot of very clever things to bring you along with these characters. Everybody had a reason for why they were evil. It wasn't just, because I like to inflict pain. That kind of stuff to me is meaningful. I'm trying to think of what other movies there's a lot of movies that haven't held up over time. Um, Let me see what else might I can't remember any, but the Videodrome and Scanners and David Cronenberg. I still like his version of The Fly. I like some of his other movies like History of Violence and things like that. But some of these body horror films just seem silly to me now. They don't seem scary. So,
There's one movie I remember watching when I was younger, and it terrified me. I hated this movie. And it's one of my favorite movies. It's like one of my top four favorite movies. But I recently, a few years back, I've rewatched it a handful of times, and it's god awful. And it's the original miniseries of It.
oh yeah,
Um,
I've seen that. Yeah,
that it's one of my favorite movies, though. It's literally one of my top four. I love it,
it was
but
great at the time.
it's terrible now when I rewatch it. I don't know. I watch it. I'm like, God. The only redeeming quality of it is Tim Curry as Pennywise. Um, and even for that matter, I actually prefer the old version to the new version. I actually don't like the new It with the Skarsgård fella. I do not. I'm not into that one at all. But still, it's like I find it interesting how I watch something and I was terrified of it or I loved it as a child, and then I go back with the knowledge I have now, and I'm like, you know what? It's not. I don't like this anymore.
I mean, as we get older, and I'm a little older than you, like your tastes will change and your
Yeah.
sensibilities change, and so it just kind of happens over time. And then also, as you become more experienced as a filmmaker and as a writer, you start to see the problems with the movies that are like, it's like, that doesn't make any sense. How did I let that go? Like, this is so dumb, you know? So I had this argument with a student about the movie Speed Racer. And
Mm-mm.
I
It's
think
old.
it's such a horrible movie, like it's so bad and like the costumes are dumb, the story is dumb. I couldn't get into any of it. And like and I'm okay with people liking movies that I don't like. In fact, I like arguing about movies and I appreciate people have different tastes. But like, as a filmmaker, I see the artistry in the special effects they did. But my God, it's so dumb, I can't even
Yeah.
imagine like people thought this was going to be good.
Yeah. That's how I feel about the Ghost Rider movie with Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the my I have a like my cousins love that. My cousins are a few years younger than me, but they love that. I can't stand. I think it's the dumbest thing ever. I'm like, this is terrible.
My kids liked it as when they were younger now. I think my son, who is older, sees the why it's not good, but they
Yeah,
were just little kids and they liked, guy head on fire and he's got
yeah,
chains and stuff. But yeah,
yeah,
Nicolas Cage has a lot of that stuff that doesn't hold up over time. Like he was in that movie not too long ago called Mandy, and people love that movie, right? But I just thought like again, like it was so over the top. And when it gets like it crossed that line where it's just like what are you doing, man? This is so silly. But there's plenty
yeah,
of people that are like, oh my God, this is the greatest performance ever. I'm like, is it really? Okay.
yeah. You know, yeah. It's true, especially with some of his older films. And I think back when like thinking back to some of the older movies, because all most of the main movies that we've talked about are from a different era. The world was different, technology was different, and as we talk about revisiting these older movies, shows, media, it makes me think of the world that we live in today, which is completely different. I think it's unrecognizable to people who I think were born in a different era, and it makes me think of this world now that is dominated by this main thing, streaming. Streaming is a fascinating thing. I think streaming is amazing. I think it's fascinating, but also I think it's easy to, since everything is on this uh, non-physical dimension of the cloud, streaming services, it's easy for certain articles and media to almost disappear. Does that concern you as we've talked about before, a collector of physical media? I mean, you are a part of a dedicated group that still collects physical media, whether it be DVDs, Blu-rays, 4Ks now, which are great. What draws you also to collecting physical media in an era where almost everything is a click away? It's on the TV, it's on streaming, Netflix, Hulu, all of these platforms. What still draws you to collecting physical media And does it concern you with the advances that streaming is now today?
Um, Streaming is here and we can't do anything about it. That's unfortunate, really. It's fortunate and unfortunate. Like it provided lots of jobs for lots of people. Now they're starting to suffer, financially because there's just too much content out there. So there's less of it, that they are going to be able to produce. So it provided a lot of really good things and and seeing things and people to make films that would never have been able to make films. So I think it's a good thing at many levels. One of the bad things is let's take a movie like what was that one that I was just talking about the other day? The Matrix. It's one of the biggest selling DVDs of all time. Like it was massive, right? And so Good Will Hunting, things like that. They didn't make a lot of, what was the big movie that came out? Like Blade Runner came out and it flopped when it came out. Nobody wanted to go see those movies, right? But there was a DVD market and it had a second life. And so those DVDs allowed those people to still make money and therefore make more films like those other ones. Because, the way they measure how movies are successful are box office in the first 2 or 3 weekends. And so if it hasn't made X amount of money in those first 2 or 3 weekends, they deem it successful or failure. Well, now that there isn't a market for Blu-ray or a very small market for Blu-rays and DVDs and 4Ks, it isn't something they can rely upon. So it's all box office right now. The good news is that people are starting to return to the movie theaters. I think that is a good thing, and I'm glad that's happening. But it is a shame that there's less of the physical media. Now, why do I collect it? I like the tangibility. I like having a tangible item of a movie that I own. I can look at my cabinet where I keep my movies, and oh yeah, I love that one. I got to rewatch this one at some point. It reminds me of just the movie experiences that I had watching the movie. And I do rewatch them, maybe I don't watch them all, but like I like having them there. And there have been instances and if you buy a movie online, you are not actually buying a movie. You're buying the rights to watch that movie as long as that same company owns the rights to show you that movie. So what has happened to me is I've bought movies online and I thought I owned it in my library, and then it was like, where to go? It's not there anymore. Turns out that, the rights to that movies, they no longer own it. And so you have to buy it again, or you have to or you have to find it somewhere else. And that to me just angers me a little bit. So having those movies, I own it for as long as the media exists. Like as long as that disc will continue to play, I have that media. I can watch it whenever I want to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that I love about collecting physical media of what we love, music, shows, films, whatever it may be, is that I think it's a way of preserving culture, right? I think whether we like it or not, the films and TV shows that we love and that we watch or buy physically preserve ideas around it and also the way that we feel about it. Because when I look at a shelf of movies or whatever it may be, I look at a title and it makes me feel a certain way. Maybe it's how I feel about the movie, how I felt when I watched it for the first time, or how it's influenced me or inspired me. I think it's a great way of preserving how we feel, right? And so when I look at my collection, I think about some of the most important ones to me. What are some of the most important things to you that you've collected physically? What are some of your favorite movies that you've collected physically that you can look at? Some of your favorite things that you can look at and be like, wow, that movie, that show meant so much to me.
I mean, I have a list. I keep a list of the movies that, like my top movies, and my
Yeah,
top movies, I own almost all of them, and I can tell you like what they are. Let me
I'd
pull
love to
them up.
hear that.
Yeah. Let's see here. Okay, so my top 10 and it changes all the time.
I know, yeah.
Nightcrawler,
Mm,
uh, Seven,
mm.
Honey Boy. The Shia LaBeouf movie is a terrific movie. Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. Inside Llewyn Davis, which is a Coen Brothers. Another Coen Brother movie I like is The Big Lebowski. That's probably my number one movie from, and as far as comedies. Ex Machina is one.
Mm.
Fight Club. Also, the that Fight Club is also the number one DVD sale of all time. That was
Really?
yeah. Civil War, the new movie, Silence of the Lambs, No Country for Old Men, and Back to the Future. Like those are I own all of these, right? Actually, I don't have Honey Boy because that one it was made for Amazon, and I just have never found the disc of it yet. But so those are the ones that kind of mean most to me. And then I have another list. Let's see here. Of like indie films, like because then there's of course there's the movies that everybody loves, and I tried not to put those on the list. Like
Yeah.
Godfather, Aliens, Alien. Like everybody loves those movies, so I wanted to kind of pick movies that were not the norm. Yeah.
There's a movie on that list. I'm so happy to hear because I fucking love this Civil War. I fucking love Civil War.
Blew me
Has
away,
such
right?
I know, yeah, it was awesome. I just had a chat about
Terrifying.
Walter. Yeah, I think that was one of the most. Have you seen Alex Garland's new one, Warfare with
Warfare. Yes. Amazing. Amazing.
yeah.
It's based, have you seen it?
Yeah, me and my friends went to go. My friend is joining the United States Marine Corps, and we went to go see it, and we fucking loved it. It was oh my god, it's
It's
literally
terrifying. Oh my God.
it's indescribable.
You walk out of there just like dazed. I mean, because it takes place in real time, and
Yeah,
and it's also they gave one of the it's based on a true event, and they gave one of the soldiers, I think it was Navy SEAL, squad or platoon, I don't know what they're called, but they were an actual outfit, and they brought those people on as consultants, and they gave one of the guy a directing credit because he was there and he told them, okay, this is the way it happened. And so
yeah,
it was, and it's so, and if you listen to the movie too, I was sitting next to a guy in the theater, and he was had a popcorn thing, and he was making this noise, and it's like, because at the beginning of the movie it's very quiet, like you hear all these things because there's a sniper, and they're like the guys are talking to each other, and they're there to kind of take out potential enemies, and they don't realize that they know that they're there, and so all these tiny noises, and then like as it all goes wrong, it gets very loud and screaming and yelling, and oh my God, it's just very, very amazing film. Alex Garland also did Ex Machina, that other one I mentioned. Yeah.
he is one of my biggest influences. I am such a big fan of Alex Garland.
Did you like
I
Annihilation?
I loved
Me
Annihilation.
too.
I
Me
it
too.
is such a I've never read the book, so I wouldn't know. But I think it's such a master class of visual effects, score, and just writing. I think he's a magnificent writer.
Brilliant. He's brilliant. I didn't like
He
his movie Men. Did you see that one?
I did, I didn't mind that. I think that one is weirder. It's weirder.
It turned I mean, I still kind of admire it, but I was like, I don't know. I didn't love it like I like his other ones. But he's an artist. He could try different things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with men, I think it's weird for him. To me, it's weird to see him do horror because I think he's such a grand action person. So to see him do such a more condensed kind of story, I actually didn't mind Men. I think I think it's very creative and fascinating with its storytelling.
And
Like
Jessie Buckley is brilliant. I like her as an actor too.
she
Yeah.
was great. I also love the man whose face is like everywhere. I think
Yes.
that was great. Yeah, I don't. That one's not my favorite from him. No, not particularly. Um,
Did you? He also wrote 28 Days Later, and now there's going to be 28 Years Later coming out that he was also a writer on. Yeah.
yeah, when it comes to that trilogy, I'm actually a bigger. I've seen 28 Days and 28 Weeks. I'm a bigger fan of 28 Weeks Later with Jeremy Renner. I actually think that one is a lot better. Um,
They had a
I
bigger budget. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I'm a bigger fan of the sequel 28 Weeks Later, but I still think, as a whole, I think, especially with like these kind of war action movies, it's all about grand scale. And I think, going back to Alex Cross, I think he does that so wonderfully. Um, and I also loved it because the military supervisor for Civil War was Ray Mendoza, who was the main director of Warfare. And
Oh, I
God,
didn't know
yeah,
that. Okay. Yeah.
he was great. Yeah, because Ray Mendoza was a Navy SEAL instructor for Buds, which is the program that you do. Really awesome guy. He's phenomenal. He is just something else. And I think, God, yeah, Warfare is just one of those movies that just sticks with you. Like after I watched it, I
Yes.
think like the song that plays during the end credits, just like it's haunting almost. I'm like, oh my God. Like me and my friends just looked at each other. Yeah, the sound design too. Oh my gosh. I am such an admirer of sound design
Yes.
because it's just such a complex endeavor. And like for example, when the jet flies low with the show of force and you just
Yeah.
feel it, yeah,
I didn't
that's
even
the
know that
type of
was a
stuff.
thing, like, and the way they shot that too. I didn't know, like, never heard of show of force. And then
Yeah.
the jet coming by, you're like, oh my God, that's, the sonic boom. You're like, it was what, like, 50 feet away from them, it seemed like. It was pretty intense.
Yeah, and I feel like they're so intentional with it. That's what I love about, I watch some war movie. I'm a big fan of war movies. Some war movies are made to be war movies, but I think other ones are then made to be very intentional. That's why I love Civil War and Warfare. They feel so intentional because to me they're very minimalistic. There's no score in Warfare, but yet it just feels so it makes me more drawn in than other war movies that are very very stereotypically cinematic. I have a big knack for realism. I love realism, and I think the way that I mean, every department of that film, the production design, the sound design, the directing, the acting, it's so intentional. The editing is it's such a complex, especially with a movie being performed in real time. There's no time cuts in the majority of that movie. It's so intentional, and as we preserve and present our work and why we do things intentionally as we're filmmakers. Let's talk about when you made your feature, because a feature is such a different animal. Everybody makes shorts, but a feature is it's a whole different game, right? It's a whole different game, a whole different animal. When you are intentional about your work, when you decide to make a feature, what are some of the most unexpected parts of the process from going from shorts? We all start with shorts, then we go into features, especially in terms of getting out into the real world. Can you walk us through the moment when you decided, okay, I'm going to make a feature? What sparks that commitment? What's your plan of action when you decide to actually make a feature?
So it kind of like, it's two steps forward, three steps back sometimes, because you can decide to make a feature, but there is still a monetary amount of, I would say that first off, if you want to make a feature with a budget, you have to have made a feature some way, somehow, at some level, right? Because in order to prove yourself as a director, you have to have had a feature, but how do you make a feature if you never made a feature? So come hell or high water, you got to figure out how to get that first one done, right? And so the first feature that I did, it kind of evolved, right? Because I made a short, and the short was successful, and then I decided to expand it. And it was called A Feral World, right? But the first one was just called Feral. And so so every year we made another segment of that movie because I could not afford to do it all in one full shoot, right? And so I wouldn't recommend doing that, but it was a way for me to do it and then have a feature, right? So, and I also really loved working with these people, with the crew, with my son, with Trevor Merchant was my camera person, and so all that stuff it was a reason to make the film and keep doing this and to get this thing done. So you can say I'm going to make a feature, and you have to kind of commit to that. But it's, like when we got Publish or Perish, like I didn't want to have to crowd fund it again, right? So I made a decision like if I can't, well, I didn't know I was going to make this decision because we had this game back and forth because the guy who plays my lead, he was in right from the get-go. He loved the script, he wanted to be in it. And we kept having this discussion like, well, if we need, $1 million to make this movie right. And well, what if we don't get $1 million? Do you want to still make it? And I'm like, well, I wouldn't mind. I guess we can, but it's not going to be the same thing, because that means we don't have department heads. That means we have to shoot it in pieces. We have to call in a lot of favors. And so I didn't really want to do that because I did that already with A Feral World, right? So I was working really hard to find somebody that wanted to help me produce the movie and finance it. And I got really lucky. I met a guy named Jonathan Miller who was at a point in his life where he wanted to produce a movie and he had money. So he's an angel investor and a producer. He never produced anything before. So once he came on board, he greenlit the movie from the get-go, right? And so our production budget was in the area of like 500,000, and then there was, post-production expenses and marketing expenses and other things that you just can't know that you're going to need to spend money on and all that kind of stuff. But once we got that budget, then it was like, okay, now I'm activated. Now I know what I need to do. I need to go through and break down the script. I need to go through every scene and say, here's what is needed for each scene. How many times am I in this location and creating I connected with a former student. Her name is Kylie Mitchell, and she was my first AD. And so she helped me do the shooting schedule. And so, but that's constantly in flux, right? Because the actor says, oh, I can't be there that day. Well, now I got to move things around. That location is not available at that time. Well, okay, I got to move things around. So all that kind of stuff. It's going to snow, it's going to rain. All these things means it's constantly in flux. And so once we made the decision, it was just being activated, getting a production designer on board to, okay, like what is the costumes going to look like? What are they wearing? Props. I need certain props. I had hero props and I had set deck, right? And so I had a terrific production designer. Her name is Kelly Spencer, and she was also a student at CU, and she was a wildly talented person. And so Trevor was my DP, and so we would sit down and I made my overheads for every single scene, and he would look at it and we would discuss it and like what I thought was the right thing. He goes, well, let's try this. And then I'm like, here's the location. Then we scouted all the locations. And then I did that again with my crew. And Trevor's like, he's got an app. He goes, well, the sun is going to be coming from here, so we can't shoot this way. We have to shoot that way. So you have to kind of work out all these things ahead of time. You never want to get to a set without having done all this stuff ahead of time when there's so much money at stake. Because like, we were shooting also during the pandemic, right? And so we had the whole, we had to have a COVID safety officer, and we had to take tests every day. And, if I got sick, if my lead actor got sick, if my DP got sick, we were shut down. That was
Yeah.
it. We were done. We got really lucky. Like we stayed on schedule and we got it all done. In hindsight, what I learned from what we did that is like we shot it in the wintertime, and basically at 4 o'clock we were done because the light changes, and so Trevor was like, we can't shoot anymore because it's 4 o'clock and this light is different. So like we had to kind of constantly think about, all right, we need to be there by 5 a.m. so we can be shooting by 6, 7, 8 o'clock so that we can get everything we got planned for that day. But it's really about the pre-production, like the sheer amount of time I put into pre-production. My as the director and producer, my fingers were in everything. Even though I had department heads, I kind of wanted to know what props, what costumes, what locations, all that kind of stuff. So it was just the sheer amount of work in getting it ready is overwhelming if you let it. Like you're a kind of guy that does things ahead of time, piece by piece. And I think the only way that can you can make a feature is if you would do it that way. There's no winging it, right? You can't wing it. You gotta like know who's bringing us. I had a great production manager, Todd Smith, who is helping me trying to produce this other feature I'm hoping to make. And he was my production. He was the not production manager. He was my line, not line producer, production manager. Yeah. So he basically, unit production manager, UPM. He was the guy that his job was to see into the future and and deal with the past. What does that mean? It means once I'm shooting during that day, he's done his job already. Yesterday, he needed to figure out where are we going to set up craft services? Where are we going to put the tents? Where are we going to like we had one shoot at in our film at the salvage yard and we needed it was on a street, but we had no place where we could, set up a home base, right? So he rented one of those those trailer things that you see like on boats, where they the shipping containers. And so he rented one of those things. I didn't even know he was doing it. A crane shows up, lowers this thing down. That was our home base, and
Wow.
so he was thinking ahead of time, where are we going to put all this stuff? I need to get a permit to put that thing there. And so we did it that day. And then he asked, it's his job to make sure it all goes away. And what do we need for tomorrow's shoot? And so you need somebody to have that sort of process to work with that you as the director hopefully don't have to deal with. When I did my first
Yeah.
feature, I was kind of doing it all. I had some people helping me, but it was volunteer, and so it's a much harder thing to do on your own, but it was a much smaller project. So there's so many elements that I'm probably just over forgetting a whole bunch of stuff.
There's too many to count, it feels like. There's
Yeah.
so much.
Yes.
And one one of the main things I think about is going is the timeline of the whole process. You have pre-production, principal photography, post-production, all the way up until picture lock, final cut, edited, whole thing. What part of making a feature surprised you the most in the process?
Surprise,
Creatively or logistically?
surprise me? Let me think. What surprised me? I mean, every single day there was a new problem to overcome. I guess what surprises me in this project was we didn't have a lot of money, but we had memo deals ahead of time, right? So everybody on the crew got paid, and it was no mystery. We said, "This is your job. This is what we can pay you. Do you agree to it? Yes or no?" Yes, okay, sign this. So there was nobody felt cheated, nobody was being taken advantage of. And so once we had all these memo deals in place, what I was surprised about was the commitment of my crew. These people were there. They gave everything. They believed in me. They believed in the project. They liked my actors. And so the sheer amount of energy that people gave to me, even though they're getting paid, they weren't getting paid what their true value was. None of us really did, even though we had that budget, we weren't able to pay people union fees, except the actors. We had to pay them because we had SAG actors. So they were probably the most expensive people on set because of that. But everyone else was kind of doing it as a break. And like, for example, here's a big surprise. So our Steadicam operator, his name is Chris Rowe. He had a Airy. He just let us use it. He had a grip truck. He just let us use it, right? So like even though he got paid pretty well, and we had to pay him a little more because there was additional stuff. But like he brought his gear that was typically you pay for his time and you pay for his gear. He was a package deal. So when you make a low budget movie in Denver, people kind of come out of the woodwork because it's not a city where there's a lot of features and fictional things going on. It's a documentary town. It's a commercial town. So when you're making a feature, people come out of the woodwork. And because I'm associated with the university and I know a lot of these people, either they were students or I met them because of my job, I'm pretty well connected in the town. And so, I built this crew of people and it was amazing. Like I think that's one of my strengths is that I can bring together people. I try to keep negative energy off my set. There's always drama on a set and I was able to like push it off. I would tell my first AD like any kind of drama, I don't want to hear it. Like don't even tell me what it is? Sorry about that. Um, like I can't get involved with the drama, and that to me is the part that it's always ugly. And if you got a problem, talk to the AD. That was some of the stuff that I really didn't like, but I was able to separate myself. Yeah.
It's hard too, because it, it's almost inevitable.
Yeah.
People, it just happens,
Yeah.
people get their feelings hurt over something, or something goes wrong, or
Yes.
it's such a mess. And I find it very fascinating and humorous how even on small student sets, it's the same exact way. Sets of 10, 12 kids, it can be fucking crazy sometimes just because shit happens,
And
And
there's more added to it at the student level is because
yeah,
everybody's trying to figure it out and learning as they go along. But what I see in a lot of film students, I'm not necessarily talking about you at all, but I see a lot of students who think that they're already masters at this, right? And so they already know all this stuff in their mind. And so they don't want to hear what you have to say, and they think they know best. And so when the director says, I need to do this, then this kid who knows nothing says, I think you're wrong. This isn't going to cut together well. I'm like, on a professional set, you're fired. This is not the place to be like questioning me. You question me in rehearsals. No one's going to question the director on set and keep their job. That's just not acceptable. And so when on a student set where there's all these egos and all these people who think they know it all, it gets very, 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 very touchy. And sometimes people have a little bit of money, right? And so they assume, like, let's say you got $1,000 from a crowdfunding thing, and you in your mind said, well, I'm going to spend the money where I need to spend the money. Well, that kid said, oh, he's got $1,000, so I'm going to buy this, and then he'll pay me back without talking to you. I'm like, wait a minute. I didn't tell you I was going to pay you back. I need this money for that. That I've seen happen a lot of times where people assume they're going to be reimbursed and they're not, and that's always a problem. And, you know, that's why contracts, even if you are best friends with this person, you got to have a contract because otherwise people make assumptions. Now, at the student level, do you need contracts? No, but there should be a discussion on the first day of production meetings about money. Don't spend anything without first talking to me because if you're expecting to get paid back, I'm not paying you back if it's not something I didn't approve.
and I'll promise you right now, that problem has already happened to the
Has it?
majority of us. It is god awful how some kids act, and or even just how they think. It's just crazy. I mean, I'm all for helping each other out. I think, but there are just some people that just get so frustrated, or expect such a level uh, of of product to be made, and they end up getting very disappointed. They end up getting upset at us, and I'll tell you what, right now, it is god awful how many sets I've been on, and the director is a goddamn asshole, and it's someone in my grade, literally someone in my grade, and it's just like, and it's like, I'm volunteering because none of us are getting paid, right? I'm here for school, and I'm here donating my time and effort, and you're over here being rude to me, and expecting money or something. It's just ridiculous. I don't know.
I can
Uh,
tell you, I've said this in class, the number one thing if you want to work in this business is don't be an asshole, right? And
Yeah.
so you were sick yesterday, so you weren't able to hear the woman who came, who is a producer, and she's tr directed, I mean, produced huge tele Grey's Anatomy, like tons of shows, right? Tons of them. So successful, right? And I can't tell you, she must have said this, and I kid you not, at least a dozen times about being kind to everybody because you never know. There's been plenty. She had several stories where, like, when she was starting out, she was really kind to this person. 5 years later, she ran into that person again. Oh, you were so nice to me. And so she got a job because she remembered how nice that person was. If you're a dick, no one's going to work with you. That's just unfortunate. They're just digging a hole, right? So yeah, like if that whoever that student is, they behave that way, even in college, no one's going to want to work with them, right? And then getting a job afterwards, when you go out, you graduate, you get a job, you're going to look back at the students that you worked with and like, oh yeah, I'm going to definitely call this guy. He was a great DP. But I'm not going to call that guy because he's a dick. I don't want him on my set. So that's just common sense. So that's unfortunate that you've seen that, but that's part of the learning process is
Yeah.
to try to like go through that. Not, it's ugly at times, and it's unfortunate. I mean, we hear a lot of complaints, the only ones that I can really act upon as a faculty member is when somebody is putting someone in danger or says something hurtful or misogynistic or so, stuff like that should not happen. Nobody should feel unsafe on a set. And so that's the only thing that I can do. But like when there's money issues and stuff like that, it sucks, but that's a lesson.
And money's such a tough thing. Money just changes. Money can just change someone like that. It's such a,
Yes.
I don't know, it's such a pain in the ass. And I also find it very funny that the main thing that people have said from people come down who are in the industry, the main thing that they say is to be nice. That's the hardest thing for some people is to be nice. I don't know why it's so hard. I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
Yeah.
um, but I wanted to go back to your feature, and I wanted to talk about you're done with your movie. It's ready to be put into the film festival circuit. When you start putting your film into the festival circuit, what are some of the things that you anticipated? And then what are some of the things that happened that you didn't anticipate?
Um, so the film festival world is a challenging one. So there are the festivals that will make your career, and then there's all the other festivals, right?
Yeah.
So all those other festivals are not valueless, but like so. For example, as for me personally, I was a tenured track professor, and by getting into a film festival, that to me is publishing, right? That means I made a product. It got it got through a jury who said this film was worthy to be included in a festival. So that was value to me, right? Um, but a lot of people go to a film festival for ego, right? They get into a film festival, the bumfuck film festival, right? And bumfuck says my film is excellent. So you go to the Bumfuck Film Festival and you're sitting there, and they show three shitty films, and then they show your film, and then I'm like, oh my God, is that how you think of my movie? Like you're gonna put my movie with these three shitty films? And so really, for me, in some ways, like I've gotten really good at knowing which festivals I want to submit to and which ones I don't want to submit to, right? And so, you know, you I the thing about Film Freeway where you submit your films is that it's once you create your page, it's so easy to just hit the button that says this festival, this festival, this festival. You just click down the line. Um, and and you're basically like trying to see you're playing a numbers game, right? If I submit to 100 festivals, then I'll get into X number. Like I usually get between 10 to 15 to 20% return. Publish or perish, we had a really good return. It was more like a 25% run. And so we got into a lot of festivals, which was really good. So, you submit to the festivals that you want, and I have my own, I've learned over time some tricks on how to choose a festival. And one of the things that I do is I look at the pictures that they post for the festival. And if I see that there are folding chairs in the venue, I am not going to submit to that festival because it's a hokey podunk thing, right?
Yeah.
Somebody put up a projector, some guy has a barn. Hey, let's put on a festival, and so like it's not going to help your career in any way. It's not going to be of any value, and so that is one thing. And the other thing I look at to see, so I look at the venues. Like they often tell you what movie theaters they're going to show it at. And I look at the theaters and then I look to see, do they have a good projection system? Do they have a nice venue? What do people say about it? Because they also they have reviews for film festivals on Film Freeway, but I have never read one that was negative, right? So you can't really use anything there. So you really just look at the venue and you look at other films that have gotten in there. Like if your film is a horror movie, then there's certain film festivals that you should kind of target. But the thing is that if you made a really good film and you don't have name talent in it, you're probably not going to get into the Big Ten, right? That's what I learned, right? And so I thought we made like it. Sometimes people break that barrier because we made like somebody told me that they make something like 100,000 movies a year in the United States, and 500 of those are outside of Hollywood, the independent ones. 500 of those are good, and somebody put us in that 500 category. So people said our film was good. And so we were like, well, we're definitely going to like get into South by Southwest, or, I thought maybe this time I'll get into Slam Dance or Sundance. But what I learned was that if you don't have name talent, they don't care about your movie, right? So they only have so many slots where they can show your movie. And so I was a little disappointed because I feel like the genre of my movie was perfect for South by Southwest. I've been to that festival and I really think it would fit well with the type of films they screen there, but you never know like what they're looking for or who's the judges are, or maybe there's political reasons they took this over that, or maybe they already had a dark comedy and they don't want another one. You never know. So that was the thing. And so you pick the festivals you want to submit to. And then you have to wait for like 6 to 8 months to find out if you got in. So there's this waiting period where you just don't know like what's going to happen. And so during that time, you should be thinking about distribution. Like, how am I going to try to get the movie sold? How am I going to get it on Amazon? How am I going to get it on all these different platforms? And there's a lot of different ways to do this. And so, once you get into I'll go into distribution afterwards, but so once you get into a film festival, you have to decide if you're going to attend or not, right? And it's expensive because you have to fly there or you have to travel there. You got to get in a hotel. The better festivals will travel you there. Typically, if you have a feature film, they'll put you up in a hotel if it's a decent festival, but you have to pay your own airfare. As a short filmmaker, which is what I'm doing right now, they don't give you anything, So I'm going to New York on Monday for a festival, and I got to put up my own, hotel and travel and all stuff. But it looks like a good festival, so I thought it might be worth it.
Yeah.
And that was the other thing about which festival to submit to is where do you want to go, right?
Yeah.
And I'm from New York, so I thought it'd be fun to go back to New York. I have some friends that are still there. The actors that are in my movie are in New York, so I thought that was a good way to kind of hook up with those people as well. So, I don't want to go to Indiana, so I'm not going to submit to Indiana. Like Iowa. There's a couple of good festivals in Iowa, and like the Julian Dubuque is a good festival. So there are a couple there, but overall, do I want to go to Iowa? Not so much. So you have to kind of, how much money do you have to spend on festivals, submissions, and then travel? So
Yeah.
you have to come up with a budget and say, okay, I'm only going to spend $1,000. I think I spent like 2 grand on entry fees for Publisher
Yeah.
Parish. And then, we got into about 25 of them, so that was pretty good. So, yeah.
I think, oh, wow. I think it's very important to plan when it comes to festivals, right? Because, I just started here and I've already been making a list of festivals I'd like to go to. Because number one, do I like where it's at? Number two, is it even a good, look at the photos? Because I've started looking on Film Freeway for festivals I would like. And you're right, there's somewhere it's some dinky fuck room with chairs and it's like 12 people. And I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
costs money? Really? It's ridiculous how they even put that shit up on there. You could pay for it. But I know I've looked at some of them, right? And I think it's great how, for example, you're from New York, you'd go back to New York for the film festivals there. Um, my family is a big Western family. We're basically all in the Western United States. So, I'm really looking at compiling a list of, Wyoming International Film Festival, Montana, Santa Fe. Santa Fe is great too. I looked at
Good
their,
festival. I never got in. I've tried a bunch of times.
it,
Yeah.
it looks great. Yeah, there's Utah Film Festival and then South Texas. I'm such a big fan of the U.S. United States. Um, my family is a bunch of ranch hands, cattle people. And so it just kind of reminds me of, when I said, I'm going to go to college. Like, really? Really? Like I just, so I, I take pride in the Western culture. And so I love how all over the United States you can find film festivals tailored to that culture, like a film festival in New York is not going to be the same film festival in Montana. And I love that. I think that's fascinating. And I think what's also amazing is the fact that if you want to and if you can travel to there. And travel's hard, I look at some of these film festivals and I've talked to some of my peers and like, you know what? Yeah, I want to submit to Venice and Berlin. It's like, how yeah, you're gonna get there. Like I think it's all about realistic expectations. You know, for example, I want to go. Let's say I want to go to Wyoming International Film Festival. That's in Laramie. Even going to Laramie for a weekend is, I think, hard enough. So I think when people want to go to Venice or Berlin or
Will they go if
Toronto,
they don't get in?
huh?
Will they go if they don't get in?
Probably not. I don't assume why they wouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, as a student, those film festivals they're not going to get into. You know,
Yeah,
they're not going to get in. I mean, I can't not apply to some film festivals because what if you
yeah,
do get in?
yeah.
Like Sundance, I have always applied to Sundance, never got in. I've always applied to like Tribeca, so there's certain ones that are worth it if you get in, you know? So, you have to kind of weigh things out and determine like, do you have a car?
I do. Yeah,
So like you could drive to some of these places, right? So like that
yeah,
you can lower the cost of travel, right? So like some of those things like, like we went to a film festival for Publisher Parish in Utah and we drove there, stayed in Airbnb, and so that was kind of fun and didn't cost that much money, and it was a nice festival. People treated us really well. So that kind of stuff I think was really useful. But you have to kind of also ask yourself, what do you want to get out of these festivals? Like, I think someone where you are in your career right now, there's value to put it on your resume to say that I was jury selected at the Wyoming International Film Festival. That means that you made a film that a jury said it was of value. So, like, that means something to you as you're building your career, right? So, I think that is useful. Once you are in the industry, let's say now you are a director, it's no longer your problem. But you're working as a crew member. It still might be a way for you to meet other people who are filmmakers. Let's say you want to be a DP, you want to be a sound guy, whatever it is you want to do. Like you will meet more filmmakers than you will meet in this industry people. So that's that's good and bad, right? Like I want to meet someone who's going to give me $1 million for my next movie. When I went to this last film festival in Hollywood, I met
yeah,
some great people, some great filmmakers. Everybody was there for the same reason, hoping to get $1 million to make a movie. So like, and there
yeah,
were better films than mine too, So there was all kinds of good films there.
yeah.
And
And I think recognition is such a hard thing to get. I think a blessing and a curse of the advancements in technology, particularly cameras and audio capturing devices is that anybody can make a film, right? 60 years ago, 40 years ago, making a movie is such a indescribable feat to make. But now anyone can do it. Anyone
Yes.
can do it. You know, you got one of these, you can do it, right? So I think about in a time, the present day, in 2025, anyone can be a filmmaker. There's a lot of filmmakers. So many filmmakers focus on going viral or finding or getting that name, getting that reputation, maybe getting viral on social media platforms. They have completely changed how I think how most people view films. What value do you think traditional festivals and screenings still hold
Over what? Like over
over
like,
digital social media viralness?
oh,
Maybe,
hmm. It depends on where, like, if you actually went viral, then there's value there. But most
yeah,
people don't, like, so that's the other thing is like, if you don't already have a following or you didn't make a movie that was groundbreaking, you're probably not going to go viral. So you
yeah,
probably have a better chance to get into a film festival that will give you the laurels that you can, put on social media that say, my film got into Wyoming International. You put the laurels and the poster there, and that means something more than, you know, 50 views.
yeah.
But my son told me about this one called Shorts of the Week. Now that one gets hundreds of thousands of views, but they only take one movie a week, right? And so it's very competitive. But if your film is selected, wow, you're going to go viral, So I think there's value in both. I've never cracked the code when it comes to getting
Yeah.
my films go viral. So I've always relied on festivals and more traditional ways of getting my movies seen.
I think there's a sense of luck to it. You know, I think social media algorithms are programmed in such a way to, I think, there is a sense of luck and repetition. And who really knows? People say that they know how to get the system to favor your content.
They
I don't
don't.
particularly believe that. Yeah, I think that's a load of bullshit people say
You
for you to
have
buy
to,
a
if you
course.
pay the right people to who know how to do that kind of thing. But like, look at the Thunderbolts, the way they're advertising this thing. Like those people are spending millions upon millions of dollars so that it'll show up on your feed. If you don't have that kind of money, it's
Yeah.
unlikely that you're going to get any kind of traction, unless you've been working on your social media for years and you've got a big following already. Yeah.
It makes me think about, because you think about the film festival circuit. And then after that, there's distribution. I kind of wanted you to go back and talk about distribution. What lessons did you learn about distribution? Is what is complex? What is complex about distribution, especially when competing with digital landscapes and this balance now between traditional physicality festivals and a online presence?
All right. So what did I learn is that distribution is a racket. The people that make the money on your movie are the distributors, not the filmmakers. It is a racket, man. They are the top of the food chain and they are dicks, right? They're not worried. They don't care about you unless you can make them money. And they're going to take the money before you get the money. So that's the shittiest thing about it, right? Like maybe you're Ridley Scott, you can get a deal ahead of time. Like, okay, you want my movie, you're going to pay me $10 million up front, right? But all the rest of us slobs, we have to find a distributor that will put my movie out into the world, right? And there's this thing called P&A. It stands for print and advertising. So they tell you you're going to get 70 to 80% of the profits once we get our P&A back. Their P&A is like they're going to spend money on social media. They're going to buy posters. They're going to get a booth in Cannes, for the market. They're going to go to Toronto Film Festival and get a booth and try to sell your movie there, and get it on different platforms. The thing about it is, though, magically, they never get their investment back. Therefore, you have given your movie away, and you're not going to see any money until somewhere down the line, maybe, right? So it's kind of a bullshit racket. And so knowing that, because I did that with my first feature, I signed with this company called Gravitas Ventures, and they were not the best. You know, they're all over your phone and your internet and your email before you sign. Once you sign away your movie, it's their movie for the next 7 to 10 years, right? And so you have no say. Uh, 2 years later, I started getting some money, which is, I didn't get a lot of money. I was getting like 2 grand, 500, 5 grand. Like, so I got a little bit of money, but it never, not what it cost me to make the movie, right? So knowing that going into Publish or Perish, we were thinking like, how can we take advantage of this? So initially we signed with this company called Buffalo 8. And everybody was like, oh, get out of that deal. Buffalo 8's the worst. You don't want to deal with them. And what do we know? So we ended up getting out of Buffalo 8. We probably would have made more money than we did, but we went the self-distribution way, right? So what does that mean? It means so part of the reason we left Buffalo 8 was because they told us they were going to market the movie for us, right? They were going to spend P&A, but we were seeing no evidence that they were spending anything other than a couple of Facebook ads, right? Like we could spend money on Facebook ads. We don't need them for that, right? We thought they were going to like go to the markets and do all this stuff for us. They might have, but my partner, who was the money guy, didn't trust them, and so he pulled out of Buffalo 8. And so instead, we went with this company called BitMax. And BitMax is a self-distribution platform. You pay them a flat fee. They're an aggregator. You pay them a flat fee of like 5 grand, right? And they put it on all the platforms you want. Like it'll, basically it's Amazon, it's on iTunes, it's on Vudu, it's on Tubi, and there's on Google Play and PlayStation. Like it's on a bunch of platforms now. The advantage of BitMax and a company like that is that we get 100% of the profits. It all comes to us. The disadvantage of that is that it's up to us to market it. If we don't have the ability to market it and break that social media thing we talked about, then the money we get back is, penance. It's not much. So we're still trying to deal with Publish or Perish, and we're talking about doing a re-release. And so my partner is going to the Cannes Film Festival and to the Cannes market in a few days, and he's bringing Publish or Perish, and we're thinking about taking it off of the AVOD, which is the advertising based ones like Tubi and Vudu. We're thinking about taking it off of those because apparently once you put it on the advertising based ones, it's basically that's it. It's in the world. It no longer is new. No one cares about your movie. Like if you go to our other movie, it's still transactional, like TVOD. So you have to pay to rent it or buy it on those platforms. So that doesn't count because less people do that nowadays. More people want to see things for free. So we're thinking about taking it off of those AVOD and re-releasing it. And he's talking, and also international sales is where a lot of the money is. And so that means we have to get, subtitles or dubs and, in other languages, which is an expense also. So somebody, not me, my partners, if he wants to do that, he's got to find the money to pay for it. Like to dub it correctly probably costs 20 to 25,000 because we have to get someone to direct it who translates it properly for the jokes to work and this and that. But distribution it's ugly for independent filmmakers because they lie to you up and down. So there's this thing called the American Film Market, AFM, and it happens every year. And this is where independent filmmakers and producers go to either finance films or to come with a finished film and try to find a distributor. And I'm telling you, these people are crooks. They are, and they're assholes. And so you really have to, and it's a tough thing too, because you made a movie and you want it to go out there. So, I don't want it to sit on my shelf. I want it to go out there. So at some point you have to decide to take a risk, right? So there's a couple of there's a distributor that I kind of wish that we had gone with and we thought about it. It's called Indie Rights. Now, Indie Rights, if they take they're like a kind of like Gravitas Ventures, and they'll take like 300 or 400 films a year, where like the big ones like XYZ and Focus Films, they'll take 7 to 10 films a year. So those like Indie Rights and Gravitas, they'll take hundreds of films with the idea that it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Some of it's going to stick and some of it's not. And so what I've heard though is that people that have gone with indie rights have seen some return. And so in hindsight, we probably should have gone with indie rights. But again, they tell you right up front, it's also up to you to market it. So, it's one of those things is like, well, how do you do this if you don't have millions
Yeah.
of dollars to market it? It's a tough thing, man. If you want to make money in this world, be the distributor.
Mhm. It's such a complex fit, I think,
It's a terrible business model too. Yeah.
yeah, because there's only a select percentage of movies that really get out there and are massively huge. They need there's a name behind it, right? You see a movie from A24 nowadays, that's all you need really, and your movie will make guaranteed millions of dollars now. And so
Yes.
independent filmmakers have such a unique view. I think their filmmaking process is is almost entirely different to ones behind a big budget, behind a big production company, because there's such a difference in their view of what's going to happen after this. Sure, being on set, the filmmaking process, but when it comes to after that, I think it's a completely different view and process. So when you look at film culture now, especially of filmmakers, this is the last question, by the way. So I would love to get your take for the future onwards. Where do you see the future of independent filmmaking going, and where do you hope to see it go?
So my hope, where I think it should go, I've had people, were you there when Daniel Youngie came to our class that day? Anyway, he's an Academy Award
I
winning.
was not, no.
Okay. He makes big documentaries, right? He's a very successful filmmaker. He's got one now that's premiering in Tribeca. He's doing really well. And I presented him this idea, like in my mind, you got these studios that are spending 100, $200 million on a movie. And so if the box office gives them $200 million in return, they didn't make their money back because it's usually twice that amount is what you need in order to get your money back because that you have to include marketing. So for a $200 million movie to make its money, it's got to be 400 million or more, right?
Yeah.
So the machine of Hollywood is so big, right? So here I am, an independent filmmaker, and I say to the guy, look, if you give me $2 million, I can make a kick-ass movie. And if you made $10 million off of that movie, because you can market the movie and you can make $10 million on a $2 million investment, is that not attractive to you? Well, to them, the people who play around in the $100 million range, $2 million is chump change, right? That's not worth their time. They don't even want to talk to you for $2 million. To them, like you and me, like millions of dollars is millions of dollars. It's like I can't
Yeah.
even wrap my head around how much money that is. But like the machine of Hollywood does not recognize independent filmmakers. That's why it's a dying institution. That being said, you get one movie that costs $300 million that tanks, it could destroy a studio, right? So if enough of these things tank, at some point somebody's going to say, you know what, I'd like to make $10 million, and I trust this filmmaker. Look, he's made a couple of films, they were good movies. He didn't have the right talent in it, but let's say we get a big name talent to star in it. We could easily make back $10 million if we have Sam Rockwell in it or somebody. So
Yeah.
that is the where I think it should go. Now, people say that's not going to happen because the machine is too big. It will happen when the industry collapses, but who knows if it will? Like we've got AI, we've got the writers' strikes and all this other stuff happening. So the industry is in is in chaos right now. Everyone's saying, don't go to Hollywood, go to Atlanta or New Mexico because Hollywood is contracting. People can't shoot there anymore. It's too expensive. And so, that is the other thing is like, I think, like, you look at a guy like Robert Rodriguez, like, he's making movies in Texas, right? And he's doing it all himself and he's making money. So, like, he's got a name, granted, and he's got a team and he's been doing it for, 30 some odd years. And he's a successful guy. But the point is that you can do it outside the system. I would say, like, if I had any advice for somebody who's trying to make a feature, is like spend the time to get name talent and not just some guy who is in, Mission Impossible for like a scene, like somebody who is a household name. Otherwise, your movie, unless you're making a horror movie, like if you're making a horror movie, those are much more marketable than anything else. So you kind of need name talent for it to happen. So that's where I hope it'll go. I hope it'll be like somebody recognizes that there is money to be made. It's just not in the $100 million range. Have you watched the show The Studio on Apple
I've,
TV?
I've seen the pilot. I've only
You should
seen the
watch it
pilot.
because that gives you an idea of like what goes on in the studio level. It's very funny. It's very interesting. It's kind of a shame because like, it gives you an idea of like what the industry is like from that level, where it's not about the filmmaking, it's about the business of film, a business of a Hollywood film. Yeah.
As time has gone on and as I've watched more and more movies, I find now that some of the most popular movies are not made with $100 million. I think some of the best movies that I've seen that have won awards recently are ones that are done very simplistically and almost with a very concise, controlled story. Here's a great example. One of the best movies that I've seen that made headlines all around the world and won an Academy Award was The Zone of Interest. That was an amazingly done film, and there wasn't this bombastic uh, production. It was just a very well written story. And so I would love to see more films like that.
Like
I'm not a big,
Anora, like was that as well. Anora was like
yeah,
the guy directed it. He also edited it. He also shot it. It was shot like an independent film. I think he still had like, $30 million to make it, but that's not a lot of money in Hollywood world.
yeah. And I'm a big fan of going back down to that level. I
Me
think,
too.
uh, these $100 million budget movies have the budget, sure, but what comes out of a 10 to 25, $30 million movie compared to $100 million movie, probably better with
Yeah.
the smaller budget because I think because you're never gonna have enough money, right? I think that's always a problem that people have. You're never gonna have enough money. But I think when you have those constraints, you become more hardworking, more efficient, more creative with what you do. And that's why I'm a big fan of companies like A24, these smaller budget, very risk taking companies who take shots on weird movies, avant garde, maybe against the grain. Uh, that's something I enjoy seeing. And I hope to see that more as well.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I always kind of, me and my son, we goof around about A24 because some of the movies are terrific.
Yeah.
It's very hit or miss for me with A24.
And then some of them are terrible. Some of them
Yeah,
are
like God, I saw the TV glow in my mind is unwatchable. Like and I tried, but people love it though.
yeah.
People
No,
it's
yeah.
very,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
very successful. Yeah.
Yeah. Or the Ochi one, the Legend of the Ochi, or whatever it was, terrible.
Yeah.
I had no what a
Yeah.
waste of money to me. I had to,
And there's
and
always
that's just
the joke that we have is like if it's an A24 movie, for some reason there's going to be goat in it for some reason, and we never know why. So
the animal. Yeah, probably. It's so, it's so, I love weirdness, but I think with some of those movies, there's no reason to the badness, which is also great too. I mean, I think that's interesting when things just happen for no apparent reason. But I think I think some of the films that they choose to produce are there's no value into into what was being made. There was no
But you're right
thought.
though. You're right though. They're giving people a chance at and having a different voice. Like it's not a superhero movie. It's
Yeah,
something new that you haven't seen before. So whether or not I like it doesn't matter. Somebody out there does, then they've got an audience. That's good.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And it also comes to personal taste.
Yeah.
Because you're right. I love the fact that they take shots on the weirdest fucking movies I've seen in my entire life. Even though I hate them, there's some movie I can't stand them, but I really do admire that. So I'm happy to see weirdness back into the mainstream because A24 is such a mainstream thing now. Everyone talks about A24, and
Yeah.
uh,
You know,
anyways,
I was talking to my colleague Chris Beeson about A24, and it's like we had kind of the same discussion that you just had. And we were saying that A24 should have like the law A24. What now? That's kind
yeah, I
of
know, okay, okay, because they're always onto something new,
yeah,
they're
yeah,
always onto something that's unimaginable, and it's
yeah,
especially with they're starting to have that name to where they're starting to have higher budgets for more things. Like Civil War was the first like major big budget movie that they had, and then there was Warfare, and I'm sure we'll see to continue to rise with bigger stories and bigger budgets. So
yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, David, thank you for being here. I love the talk that we had. Hopefully, you could understand me. I'm trying.
I
This is ridiculous.
yeah, I understood every word you said. I just,
Okay.
thank you for having me. It was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome, man. Well, have a great summer. I didn't get to see you for the last day. Have a great summer. Thanks for coming on here, talking about all this stuff. And thank you again. I'll see you next semester. I have you for editing.
Awesome. Looking forward to it, man.
Looking forward to it as well.
All right, man. Keep writing.
I will. I will keep creating. So do you. Have a good one, man.
You
Take it
too. Take
easy.
it easy.